this Tuesday edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point. You are listening to high definition radio, more content per cubic inch of air than any other place on your dial. That at least is our goal. You just heard a spot for the Military Bible Stick that we're working in conjunction with the folks at militarybiblestick.com this week. We want to get as many of these copies of the Word of God in the hands of our soldiers. We just heard from Chuck Hagel. I mean, our soldiers need the resource of the Word of God because of some of the social pressures that they're having to deal with in the military with this administration under this commander-in-chief, pushing things that no military personnel ought to have to deal with. So these people need to be strengthened and nurtured and nourished by the Word of God. This Military Bible Stick is a way to do that. This is a Bible that can go anywhere. This is a Bible stick developed by Faith Comes by Hearing, and the Department of Defense, their protocol, this is all approved by the Department of Defense. It contains a dramatized version of the New Testament and selected Psalms in audio form. 400,000 of these units are out there. They're in circulation. We send them to military chaplains who in turn distribute them to soldiers who request them. And family members, Faith by Hearing, will also send a dramatized New Testament on a CD or an MP3 to the spouse and a children's version to the families when those are requested. So a soldier will know not only does he have access to this audio version of the Word of God, but his family will be blessed also by the Word of God. Now, we get requests from chaplains, or the Military Bible Stick folks get requests from chaplains all the time for these audio Bibles. The soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, all requesting them, requests coming in from all over the world. We want to work with them this particular week, focus on the Military Bible Stick campaign. So for $25, you can underwrite the cost of one military Bible stick and see that a soldier is outfitted not just with the armor that's given to him by the United States military, but is able to wear the full armor of God. So this is rugged, it's portable, it's made to military specs, it's not much bigger than a pack of gum, so very portable, very handy. So call 800-800-2555, that's 800-800-2555, or you can go to militarybiblestick.com and put the Word of God in the hands of a soldier this week. Now, I've got a column up at rightlyconcerned.com, and I encourage you to go there and read this column, because what I want to respond to in this segment is a tweet that Ed Schultz sent out yesterday. Drudge featured his tweet, and what Ed Schultz tweeted out last night is gay people were really the ones being persecuted in Hitler's Germany. So there's naturally been a lot of reaction to what Ed Schultz said, because he's really minimizing the suffering of the Jewish people. Now, there were likely somewhere between 6,000 and 15,000 homosexuals that did die at the hands of Hitler in concentration camps and in other places. So there's no question, and that's a tragedy. Nobody wants any homosexual to die. We don't want that for anybody. So it's a tragedy. And 10 to 15,000 homosexuals put to death by the Nazi regime is 10 to 15,000 too many. But it pales in comparison to the 6 million Jews that were murdered by the Nazis and gassed and sent to die in concentration camps. And Schultz seems to be blithely and blindly ignoring that plain historic fact. So it's understandable that people would react to this. But here's another dimension of this that I want you to be aware of that not a lot of people know about. And I want to be sure that you understand this. So when this subject of homosexual persecution by the Nazis comes up, you are prepared to respond to that accusation. Now, here is the deal. The bottom line is that the persecution of homosexuals in Hitler's Germany was carried out by homosexuals. I want to reiterate that. I want to restate that. I want to repeat that. The persecution of homosexuals in Hitler's Germany was carried out by other homosexuals. Now, what Hitler was trying to do with his military, with his army, is he was trying to revive the Greek ideal. The Greek ideal was hyper-masculine homosexual behavior. Remember, I don't know if you saw the movie. I never saw the movie 300. It was about the 300 Spartans who protected the pass at Thermopylae from the Persians. Now, that was based on a true historic fact. I've done some reading and research into that. But what a lot of people don't know is that the Spartans, these were Greek warriors, those 300 soldiers consisted of 150 pairs of an older male and a younger male who were homosexually bonded. They fought together as a warrior team, as a warrior twosome, as a warrior duo. And it was this ideal of the Greek hypermasculine homosexual that Hitler was trying to revive with his military. Now, Hitler gathered around himself homosexuals who were like him. Hitler himself was very likely a practicing homosexual. He gathered homosexuals like himself around him to serve with him in pursuing his sinister designs for the world. Now, there was in Germany in 1930 something called the Institute of Sexology, part of the Sex Research Institute there in Germany. Now, here is what the man who served as the director of the Institute of Sexology in 1930, this guy was the director of this institute in 1930 as Hitler was rising to power. And here's what he said: not 10% of the men who in 1933 took the fate of Germany into their hands were sexually normal. So this is the guy that was the director of this institute, and he said not 10% of the men who took control of Germany under Hitler and around Hitler were sexually normal. 90% of them were sexually non-normative, sexually abnormal. Now, you're familiar with William Shirer. He wrote the monumental history, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. So he's a historian with impeccable credentials. And listen to what William Shirer said. He wrote this book in 1963, so this is back before you had to bow to politically correct notions about homosexual behavior. This is William Shirer, Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. This is what he said about the SA. These are the Brown Church, Hitler's Brown Church. Quote, many of its top leaders, beginning with its chief, Ernst Röhm, were notorious homosexual perverts. That's back in the day when you could refer to homosexuality as a perversion without fear that you were going to be banished from polite society. So William Shirer says, look, many of the top leaders of the SA, starting at the very top with Ernst Röhm, were notorious homosexual perverts. That's William Shirer's phrase. That's not mine. Notorious homosexual perverts. Now, there's another historian of Nazi Germany by the name of H.R. Knickerbocker, and he also talked about Ernst Röhm, who was the head of the 2.5 million stormtroopers. There were 2.5 million stormtroopers. They were beginning to rival the German military, the Wehrmacht, in size, and that figures into the story. Now, this is what Knickerbocker said, and again, this is written at a time when you could say this without being fined and sent to a re-education camp and lobotomized before you can come back to polite society. H.R. Knickerbocker, and again, I'm just quoting him. These are not my words. These are the words of a noted historian. Ernst Röhm, as the head of the 2.5 million stormtroops, had surrounded himself with a staff of perverts. His chiefs, men of rank of Gruppenführer or Obergruppenführer, commanding units of several 100,000 stormtroopers, were almost without exception homosexuals. Indeed, unless a stormtroop officer were homosexual, he had no chance of advancement. So the question then, if Hitler was surrounded by hypermasculine homosexuals, who were the homosexuals that were being persecuted in Nazi Germany? The objects of Nazi wrath were soft, effeminate homosexuals whom the Spartan stormtroopers despised. Remember, their ideal of homosexuality was the hypermasculine Greek warrior. They despised soft, effeminate homosexuals. They were the ones that became the object of Nazi persecution. Now, prior to Hitler's assumption of power, homosexuality was known in Europe as the German vice. It was particularly well known and widely practiced in Germany. Europe called it the German vice. And before Hitler came to power, it was a crime. And those that were apprehended committing this crime were sent to the Institute of Sexology for evaluation and review and counseling. Now, what this meant is a lot of Hitler's officers had patient records at the Institute of Sexology. They had been sent there for evaluation and treatment. And Hitler said, I just cannot take the chance that these records, these patient records, will see the light of day. So in 1930, Hitler had all of the records in all the files in the Institute of Sexology brought out of the Institute, burned, and then he burned the entire Institute to the ground to cover his tracks. Here's what Ludwig Lenz, the assistant director of the Institute of Sexology at the time, this is in 1930 when this happened, he was the assistant director. Here's what he said. We had a great many Nazis under treatment at the Institute. Why was it then, since we were completely non-party, that our purely scientific institute was the first victim which fell to the new regime? The answer to this is simple. We knew too much. Our knowledge of such intimate secrets regarding members of the Nazi Party and other documentary material, we possessed about 40,000 confessions and biographical letters, was the cause of the complete and utter destruction of the Institute of Sexology. So Hitler burned it to the ground to conceal from the German people the sexual proclivities of his officers. Now, the Night of the Long Knives, you'll hear about that. And gay activists said that's when Hitler went out and killed a bunch of homosexuals. Well, Ernst Röhm was the main target of the assassination attempt, but there is a noted German historian by the name of Lothar Machtan, and he says, yes, indeed, Ernst Röhm was a notorious homosexual pervert. That's not the phrase that Machtan would use. That's William Shirer. But he was an open homosexual, and he was murdered that night. But the reason that Lothar Machtan, he wrote this in 2001. He's not a member of the vast right-wing conspiracy. And he says the reason that Hitler had Röhm assassinated on the Night of the Long Knives and other stormtrooper officers was that Röhm was about to out Hitler to the entire German populace. He was going to tell the entire German people that Hitler was a homosexual as a part of an attempt to launch a coup and take Germany, take the power, the reins of Germany out of the hands of Hitler using the stormtroopers to do it. So he was a menace to Hitler's hold on power, and that's why he was put out of the way. Here's what one historian said. Ernst Röhm wasn't shot because the Nazi Party felt outraged by the abrupt discovery that he was having his stormtroopers. That had been known for ages, but because his sway over the SA had become a menace to Hitler. That's the other half of the story that Ed Schultz wants to tell you, and they don't want you to know. Other members of the gay Gestapo do not want you to know this half of the story. Well, now you do. Focal Point, and they have our talk.